Good morning from Cairo. Welcome to This Week. Flashpoint, Middle East. Breaking this morning, U.S. warships in position for a possible strike on Syria. Accused of using chemical weapons, has Syria finally crossed a red line?
It is very troublesome.
Are we on the brink of war? Plus, in Egypt, anarchy on the streets of this key U.S. ally. We're here, on the ground, and anchoring from the region with all the breaking details. And 50 years later, remembering a day that changed the nation.
What was at stake that day?
The future of America.
Was Dr. King's dream fulfilled? The Powerhouse Roundtable weighs in on that and all the week's politics. It's all right here, this Sunday morning.
From ABC News, a special edition of This Week with Martha Raddatz in Cairo and Jonathan Karl in Washington starts right now.
Good morning. George is off today. We're reporting from a region on the brink, and all eyes are on Syria, where an apparent chemical weapons attack could lead to American military action. Here in Cairo, we're just 100 miles from the Mediterranean Sea, where U.S. warships are now at the ready. This morning, officials tell ABC News that U.S. Navy destroyers now in the Mediterranean could be used to carry out limited military strikes, cruise missile strikes, designed to deter or prevent another chemical attack by the Assad regime if this week's suspected attack is verified.
This is clearly a big event of grave concern. That starts getting to some core national interests that the United States has.
President Obama has so far been unwilling to militarily intervene in Syria, despite the deaths of more than 100,000 people and a vow he made more than 1 year ago.
That's a red line for us, and that there would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons front.
With that line possibly crossed, Senator John McCain fears U.S. credibility is now at stake.
You can't look at those pictures without being deeply moved. Are we going to just let that go on?
So how will President Obama respond? The White House is considering a number of options. And for more on that, let's bring in my colleague Jonathan Karl in Washington. John, what can you tell us?
Martha, the president has ordered his national security team to draw up options for a possible military strike on Syria. One official tells me there is, quote, a strong suspicion that the Assad regime is responsible for what appears to be a large-scale chemical attack on civilians, including many children. The intelligence community is still gathering evidence, but the senior official tells me there are already strong indications implicating the Syrian government. The attack was on rebel-held territory and apparently done using rockets that the rebels do not possess. But there is a divide in the White House on how forcefully to respond, although an official tells me if there is a strike, it must be timely, done soon enough to prevent another chemical attack. The White House does not want to act alone. U.S. officials are back-channeling through the UN to see if Russia could be convinced to agree to a resolution. Remember, Russia has veto power at the Security Council. If there is no UN authorization, the United States would lead any possible strike. But one senior official tells me, quote, we do not want to do anything on our own. U.S. allies must commit both resources and political will. We'll have more from here in Washington in a few moments, but first let's go back to the region. Martha?
Thanks, John. Let's bring in Colonel Steve Ganyard, a veteran fighter pilot and former Marine Corps commander who flew combat missions in the Gulf War and also saw the policy side of these decisions as a Deputy Secretary of State. Welcome, Colonel Ganyard. I want to get right to the question about these possible cruise missile strikes. The White House has made very clear there will be no boots on the ground. So how would these cruise missile strikes work out of the Mediterranean?
There are a couple ways that can be done, Martha. One is by launching these cruise missiles from ships at sea that would be out in the eastern Mediterranean, or they can be launched from submarines. We got to remember what a cruise missile is. It's a long 20-foot sort of flying torpedo, and it has wings on it and a little jet engine that allows it to fly at very low altitudes over the sea. It can fly through mountain canyons, and it can hit with accuracies where you can pick third level window on the left. So that kind of accuracy is good. But we also have to remember that they're small warheads and there are not a lot of these missiles. And so right up front, if it's going to be low risk, we know that we're going to be prescribed in the amount of military force we can apply.
One of the things people we've talked to have said is there might be missions with fighter jets. I know you've gone on these kinds of missions before. This would be very different because the fighter jets would not actually enter Syrian airspace. How does that work and why wouldn't they?
So the idea is that the Syrians have created this sanctuary with their surface-to-air missiles. You can think of it as a dome of sanctuary over Syria. The president has said we want low risk, which really means that we want low risk to U.S. personnel. So he does not want U.S. aircraft flying into, penetrating that dome, that sanctuary that the Syrians have created. And so we will use our aircraft and our bombers to launch glide weapons, standoff weapons from well outside the Syrian surface-to-air missile threat, so that our air crews will not be in any danger and can return home safely.
Let's talk about targets. Obviously, this is all about chemical weapons. You can't really go after chemical weapons without creating more danger, can you? So talk a little bit about the targets and what the U.S. and whoever joins in could do.
That's exactly right. You would think chemical weapons, we would go in and destroy the chemical weapons with bombs. But chemical weapons can only be destroyed with very, very sensitive technology that incinerates them or chemically neutralizes them. You can't just go in and drop a bomb on a bunker and expect it to neutralize the Syrian chemical capabilities. In the worst case there would be that you would bomb this bunker and you would throw chemical weapons all over the desert and perhaps throw these containers of sarin gas or nerve gas, some sort of agent that could be picked up by somebody and used in a terrorist attack. So highly unlikely that we will go after the sites themselves that contain these weapons, but we'll probably attack things that allow them to employ these kinds of weapons, things like airfields, like command and control facilities, military headquarters, perhaps airplanes, airfields, those things that would allow the Syrian military to employ gas against its citizens.
From what you've heard, does this seem like a symbolic attack, or could it actually really do some good?
I think we need to temper our expectations. This is a very limited attack. What's being discussed is a very limited military attack. I think the best that we could hope for is to deter Mr. Assad from using chemicals against his people again. But it's not going to help with the refugee problem. And worst case, it could lead to he would just shrug off the attack, and it would precipitate follow-on military attacks and perhaps drag us into a larger Middle East conflict, which is something that the White House seems quite keen to avoid.
Thanks so much for joining us, Colonel Ganyard. Appreciate it.
Thank you.